Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good evening, everyone. This is one of those situations where I'm trying to make up for what I messed up last time. Right? Have you ever tried something, it went really bad, and all you can think about is, I got to get out there and try that again. I have to try that again. I have to make up for my mistake. I have to mess up. I don't know how that works in your world, maybe in your career. I don't know. Maybe you have that feeling in sports, maybe a hobby. I don't know. For me, when it comes to preaching, teaching, broadcasting, if I have a bad sermon, if I have a bad lesson, if I have a bad podcast, it will drive me crazy until I can do the next one, because in my mind, the next one is going to be really good and it's going to make up for the last one. So maybe someone heard the last one and they were like, man, he doesn't know what he's doing. But maybe, just maybe, they'll listen to the next one, and then the next one they'll be like, oh, he must have just have had a bad day. He may have, but typically people aren't that gracious. They're like, you're an idiot, and that's the end. But in my mind, even if it doesn't make up for it for anyone else, it makes up for it in my mind, right? Like in my mind, I can sit there and go, well, that last one did not go well, but this one did. Okay, so all right, okay, good. It's almost like a reassurance. Oh, I can still do this. I don't need to quit. I know that's really extreme, but after a bad sermon or a bad broadcast, you almost want to just say, you know what? I don't ever want to do it again. I'm just going to delete everything and never be heard from again. I know that's extreme, but that's why you can't always follow your emotions, right? But sometimes that's what I feel. But to say all of that, this broadcast right now is my attempt. See, now I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself. It is my attempt to make up for the last one, because in the last one, well, I made a mistake, and a pretty embarrassing mistake. And I will explain that mistake right after I give you a proper introduction. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It is Tuesday, April the 2nd, 2024. It is currently 9:47 p.m. Central Time, and I am coming to you live from the Theology Central studio, located right here in Abilene, Texas. Now, all of this week, we are working on one word, and that word is flee. F-L-E-E. Flee. That's what we're thinking about, meditating on, working on. I've given you an assignment to look up to try to find at least 100 verses in your Bible that uses the word flee. Now you can find the different fleeing, fled, flee, whatever tense you want to find. However it's written out, I want you to find at least 100 of these flee verses that talk about this idea of fleeing, or that someone has fled, or, just the concept of to flee. I want you to find all of those. And once you find them, then I want you to put them in different categories. You can come up with the categories. And then I kind of want you to write out just a brief little summary of all the things you've learned in regards to this word flee. What does the Bible have to say about fleeing? What did you learn, right? So I've given you an assignment. I think I did pretty good with giving you that assignment. Then I also connected this to the Sermons 2.0 app challenge, right? So I told you to grab the Sermons 2.0 app, which you can download from the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, and to just do a search for the word flee, F-L-E-E, and what do? You just start listening to random sermons. Now, as you're looking up the verses that has the word flee in it, or fleeing, or fled, or whatever tense, you may go, oh, wait, that verse has fleeing. I'll do a search for a sermon on that particular verse, and then you choose one of them at random. Remember, you're not supposed to be looking at the church or the speaker. You're trying to make it as random as possible. So I think I've given everyone at least a good study for this week. I think it's beneficial. I think it's helpful. So I did that. Everything's good. All right. Now I'm like, okay, now I want to, when I give the study, I do the study. So what am I going to do? Well, let's start working on the verses. Let's do that. Let's start working on the verses. So I grabbed the Blue Letter Bible app. I went to the search bar. I typed in flee. And immediately I was taken to Genesis chapter 16, verse 8. Genesis chapter 16, verse 8, where we read these words, and he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence comest thou, and whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. And I'm like, okay, all right. I know that story. I know how Sarai treats Hagar. I know all the things because that story bothers me. That story disturbs me. That story, I even talked about, that story when I did kind of a mini series about sexual violence in the Bible, because I believe how Hagar is used there is just absolutely horrific. So I knew the story, but in my mind, I was like, okay, Sarai clearly mistreats Hagar. Hagar has to basically, she flees, she runs. And here in Genesis 16:8, the angel of the Lord is there. In fact, if you look at Genesis chapter 16, verse 8, Genesis chapter 16, verse 8, if you start in verse 7, and the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain and the way to shore. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou goest? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. Now, why did she flee? Because if you look at verse 6, Sarai dealt hardly with her. Some translations, she mistreated her, and she mistreated her obviously in such a severe way that Hagar's like, I gotta go. I gotta flee. Where am I going? I don't know. I just have to get away from her. She's pregnant. She's alone. And at that period of history, I mean, she had to be mistreated really, really bad. So I'm like, okay, here is Hagar fleeing. And who is she fleeing from? Well, she's fleeing from, supposedly the godly people in the story, right? Because Abram and Sarai, God had appeared to Abram. God had spoken to Abram. He was giving them instructions. He gave them promises. He told them everything. And what have they done? Well, Abram has shown fear, and he lied and deceived and went to Egypt instead of trusting in the Lord. And when he went to Egypt, what did he do? He lied about Sarai being his sister and not acknowledging that she was his wife. And then, Pharaoh gets in trouble. But then what happens? Abram and Sarai comes out of Egypt they are more rich. And some of those things they come out of Egypt with is obviously a servant girl, a servant named Hagar, a slave. And then instead of trusting in God for his promise to give them a son and make them a great nation, Sarai comes up with a great idea. Hey, Abram, use our slave. Yeah, here's my slave. Take her to be your wife. Now we have polygamy. We have adultery. I mean, look, Hagar doesn't have any agency in this story. She has no way to offer consent. I think it's very fair to say, and many would argue, that she's basically raped. And so the whole story is horrible. And then Sarai, she seems to get upset. Now, what I did when I talked about it earlier today, when I read the story in Genesis chapter 16, I made this brief mistake. Well, it was somewhat of a brief mistake. I caught it relatively quick, but let me show you what happened. All right. So Genesis chapter 16, look at verse 3. We'll go to verse 3. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. Now, when I read that in my original teaching, my mind was already 4 or 5 verses ahead. I was already thinking, look, Sarai's going to mistreat her. Hagar's going to go. That's why she's fleeing. And I immediately said, why is Sarai despising Hagar? Why? Hagar's obviously despising Sarai. And I don't know why I said that. I messed up. I caught it relatively quick because then I read the next verse, which says, and Sarai said unto Abraham, my wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid unto thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. And so I kind of blamed Sarai for despising Hagar. We can understand why Hagar would despise Sarai. Hey, I was in my own country. Next thing you know, I'm a slave to you two. And then, your God supposedly tells you something, it doesn't work out. The next thing you know, I'm being used for, what you think is, I guess, a righteous purpose, but I'm being abused here. And now I have a child with this man who took and used me. I mean, come on. You can see why Hagar would despise Sarah. But to be fair, I think I was accurate. Sarai is not happy about the situation either. She's upset. In fact, I believe Sarai begins to despise Hagar as well. Hagar despises Sarai for good reason. So I don't know why Sarah would despise Hagar, but clearly, even though the text doesn't state it, it's all over the place. She gets mad. She mistreats Hagar. She despises her. So the godly people in this story are doing some really horrible things. And I'm going to read Genesis 16 from another translation. All right, Genesis chapter 16. I'm in chapter 17. Here we go. Genesis chapter 16. We'll go to verse 4. Genesis 16:4 in another translation. He slept with Hagar, and she became pregnant. When she saw that she was pregnant, her mistress became contemptible to her. Then Sarai said to Abraham, "You are responsible for my suffering. You are responsible for my suffering." And around the way, that translation, Sarai does despise someone. She's despising Abram. And then not only does she despise Abram, then she mistreats Hagar. Sarai despising everyone. And at no point does Sarai go, wait a minute, I'm the one. I came up with this plan. This is all me. This is all me. All right. And so what happens? You are responsible for my suffering. I put my slave in your, then Sarah said to Abraham, "You are responsible for my suffering. I put my slave in your arms. And when she saw that she was pregnant, I became contemptible to her. May the Lord judge between me and you." Abram said to Sarai, "Here your slave is in your hands. Do whatever you want with her." Then Sarah mistreated her so much that she ran away. Abram then is a complete coward. He doesn't even stand up to his wife going, whoa, wait a minute. This was your idea. Yeah, but no, he just like, hey, do whatever you want. He doesn't defend Hagar. Nothing. The whole story is so messed up. But we have a fleeing happening. Now, here's what's crazy about the fleeing in this story. Hagar flees. And then what happens? The angel of the Lord shows up and tells Hagar, "Go back and submit." Absolutely crazy story. So that what we took from that, or at least I tried to challenge you with that, is that sometimes we can flee because we don't like a situation. We can't stand the situation. We want out of the situation. We want something different. And God's word may be saying, no. You have to stay. You have to submit. You have to submit. Don't flee, submit. And that is a lot we could talk about there. So that's kind of where I didn't mess up horribly, but I messed up enough that it obviously has bothered me. And the reason it bothered me is because I think that's the first, kind of use of the word, right? And so we're so early on into the kind of this challenge to study this word. The last thing you want to do is mess up on the first real teaching on it. You want to knock it out of the park from the first one so that people will keep listening. And it was strike one, strike two, strike three. You're out. Grab some wood there, bub. That's it. Go sit down. You struck out. All right. So, but I'm back up at the plate. There's the first use of it right now. If you remember, Genesis chapter 16, if we go to, you see here, where do we want to go? If we go to we'll go to verse 4. And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. And Sarah said to Abraham, "My wrong be upon thee. I've given my maid unto thy bosom." And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. But Abram said unto Sarai, "Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee." And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. So actually, the first place where, any variation of fleeing or flee shows up is in verse 6. And then in verse 8, she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarah. Now, there's a lot we could do with that. I focused on the fact that in the very next verse there, the angel tells her to go back and to submit. I really focused on that. Now, we could look at this from a different perspective, which we didn't talk about in the last broadcast. And we could talk about how sin, when sin happens, it leads to situations where fleeing may follow. Sin leads to fleeing. Sin leads to, you may flee from a situation you should be in because you're sinning. You want to sin. So you flee from what you shouldn't be fleeing from. You may flee to something that you shouldn't be fleeing to. Sin and to flee or fleeing, I think are somewhat connected. I think they are. So here's what I want to do this evening. I want to look at some of the next verses in Genesis where the word flee shows up. Now, I did not look for any variation on the Blue Letter Bible app. I just typed in the word flee, F-L-E-E. So I'm staying with that. If there is other variations to flee in Genesis, you can correct me. But the next one I have is we go from Genesis 16 to Genesis 19. Now, no, just note in Genesis 16, all of this is just sin. I mean, unless you want to try to, we could make an argument. Well, wait a minute. The 10 Commandments haven't been given yet. So maybe this is not really, I know sometimes people play those games, but I think the whole situation is just messed up in my estimation. All right. But the next one we find is Genesis 19. Is Genesis 19. And when we come to Genesis 19, we have another story filled with a lot of sin, filled with a lot of, bad decisions from supposedly righteous people, because we have, the main character in this story, Genesis chapter 19, and there came 2 angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. So we have angels. We had an angel in Genesis 16. We had the angel of the Lord. We have 2 angels in Genesis 19. So isn't that interesting? The fleeing is connected with sin and angels are involved. But here, Lot shows up. Now remember, as messed up, Lot does some horrible things here. First, he has his family in Sodom and Gomorrah, and you could say that was a bad decision, early on to move towards Sodom and Gomorrah, and he did so more for economic reasons, maybe more for a chance to, have position, prestige, because when it says, and it came to evening, he sat in the gate, a lot of people understand that him sitting in the gate shows that he had reached some level of leadership within the city. But he's inside these wicked cities. We know Sodom and Gomorrah are known for their wickedness, right? They're known for their greed, their wickedness. There's lots of different, sometimes people only understand the sin to be that of supposedly homosexuality. There were a lot of other sins in Sodom and Gomorrah that for some reason we forget. These were ungodly, wicked cities. And Sodom is there. Or Lot is in Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah are these wicked cities, and Lot is there. Now, just like in Genesis 16, Abram and Sarai, they're supposed to be the godly ones, the ones that God has revealed himself to, has spoken to, at least to Abram. They're the godly ones of the story, and they have demonstrated sin and deceit and they're mistreating a girl that they used and abused. Horrible situation, which I cannot stress this enough, that even in the Bible, God's people commit horrible sin, which reminds us the gospel is not about making bad people good the way, in some kind of like a morality play. No, the whole gospel is about God saving sinful people, even though they remain sinful, because we still have a sinful nature and we still sin. But that's why he saves us with an imputed righteousness, not an infused righteousness. We've turned the gospel into God transforming us here on earth. And in a practical way, we forget the transformation of our position because we're saved by an imputed righteousness. We can get into a whole discussion here. But the reason I'm stressing this is in Genesis 19, the key character here is Lot. Now, Have you ever read about Lot in the New Testament? Now, Lot does horrible things here. He's got his family. I was starting to list some of them. He has his family here in the city. When he finally tries to tell them to get out, his own family kind of like looks at him like, what are you talking about? That don't even take him serious. And then the next thing you know, he's going to find himself with his daughters, and he's going to get drunk, and he's going to have sexual relations with his daughters. And you say, well, they got him drunk. He's the one who got drunk, and he does it not just once, he does it twice. Right? I mean, come on. I mean, but look at how the New Testament describes him. Go to 2 Peter. 2 Peter. And this is hard to reconcile. 2 Peter chapter 2. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 6. And turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemn them with an overthrow, making them an ensample unto those that after should live ungodly, and delivered just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked, for that righteous man dwelling among them, and seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from the day to day with their unlawful deeds. He's referenced as just. He's referenced as righteous. And you're like, how can he be referenced that way? Well, I think it goes back to a very common or very important concept. We are declared righteous by faith. Abraham believed and was declared to be righteous. He was declared to be righteous by faith. This is our positional righteousness, not our practical righteousness. Our positional righteousness and our practical righteousness are never the same. People can try to justify it all day long. Lot does so many things wrong here, there's no way to get around it. But he can be declared righteous because of faith. But someone by faith who gets declared righteous is righteous before God because of an imputed righteousness, but not righteous in a practical way because we fall short all the time. So here's the story. So, and we can, I see, how far do we want to go? There's a lot of verses here we have to read, but we go through the basic concepts here, right? So these angels come down, and if you note, what happens, the angels come in, Lot kind of knows, hey, this is a bad situation. We got to get you inside. You don't want to be out here because, well, bad things are going to happen. Well, then the men of the city basically come to the door like, hey, give us these men that we might know them. And then Lot does, again, such a righteous thing. Hey, no, don't do that. Here, you can have my daughters. Here, you can just do whatever you want with them. Horrible situation. All right. Verse 8, you read this horrible situation, or verse 7, verse 6, Lot went out at the door unto them and shut the door after him and said, I pray you, brethren, do not do so wickedly. Behold, now I have 2 daughters, which have not known a man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do you to them as good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. Just a horrible story. I mean, look, you can sanitize these stories. You can try to Hallmark movie them. You can try to Disney them. You can do whatever. You can Sunday school them. There's nothing to sanitize. All your attempts to sanitize is just you changing the reality. He offers up his daughters. So is it not interesting that the first flea, Genesis 16:8, you have a woman being mistreated. And the second one in Genesis 19:20, the next use of the word flee, well, we have women being offered up to be mistreated and abused. And you have angels in both stories. It's just interesting that there's a lot of common things between them. All right. So they said, stand back. And they said again, this one fellow came in to sojourn, and he will needs be a judge. Now will we deal worse with them? And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and it came near to break the door. But the men put forth their hand, pulled Lot into the house to them, and shut the door. So it's starting to get violent, and then the 2 angels step in. All right? Hear what they say. But the men put forth their hand, pulled Lot in, and they smote the men that they were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. So they supernaturally engage here and make all of these men blind. And the men said unto Lot, Hast thou here any besides son-in-law, and thy sons and thy daughters, and whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out this place. For we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxing great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it. Hey, we've got to go. We got to get out. We've got to get out. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, and which married his daughters, and said, Up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocketh unto his sons-in-laws. That don't even take him serious. Now you could say that's because righteous Lot was living such an unrighteous life that they didn't even take him serious. Maybe this showed more the condition of his sons-in-laws not being worried or concerned about some kind of judgment from any kind of supernatural beings or from God or from anyone else. We could discuss that all day. Verse 15, and when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy 2 daughters, which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. Verse 16, and while he lingered. Wait. You're supposed to be getting out. But he lingers. Why does he linger? Why? He's being told, in a sense, look, the word hasn't been used yet, but basically they're saying, you need to flee. You need to get up. You need to get out. But he lingered. Now, the word isn't used yet, but the concept is clearly here. Right? I mean, I think so. I think that's fair. So if the other situation is, hey, sometimes we want to flee when we have to submit, if that's kind of a major lesson here, and sin leads to situations where you want to flee. In this situation, sometimes we are told to flee and we don't listen. Sometimes we are warned by God to flee and we're like, no, we want to stay. Sometimes we flee and God says, no, go back and stay. And then sometimes God says, go. And we're like, no, I'm going to stay right here. Okay. I don't want to. He lingers. And the men laid hold upon his hand and upon the hand of his wife and upon the hand of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought him forth and set him without the city. Now, just remember, any time we avoid chastisement, wrath, judgment, eternal damnation, it's always because of God's mercy. It's not because we deserve it. It's not because we have proven to be good. It's because he is merciful and gracious. All right, verse 17, and it came to pass when they had brought them forth abroad, he said, Escape for thy life, look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain, escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. Hey, you've got to get out. You've got to go. Now it says, escape to the mountain, right? Escape to the mountain. So here's the angel of the Lord. Here's these angelic beings telling him to go. These angels telling him to go. All right. I said the angel of the Lord, but these 2 angels, all right, telling him to go. You got to go. And it says, escape to the mountain, or you're going to be consumed. Now, this is crazy to me. Verse 18, and Lot said unto them, Oh, not so, my Lord. No, not so. No way. No, I can't do that. And you're like, what are you talking about? The whole place is about to be destroyed. And you're going to start having I don't like your plan. I don't like it. It's like you run into a burning building and you're like, okay, we got to get out. We're going to go this way. And the person's like, no. I don't want to go out that way because I want to go out the front door because there's a Starbucks right across the street. I don't want to go out that door. I want to go. And you're like, what are you talking about? We're going to burn up. It's almost like, no. I don't want to go to the mountain because look what he says. Behold, this is just crazy. Behold, now thy servant hath found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast showed unto me as saving my life, and I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil take me and I die. Hey, you've been merciful, you've been gracious, it's so wonderful, all the things you're doing for me, but I can't go to the mountain, because that's just bad, that's dangerous. You can't send me there. So what happens? And notice, I cannot escape to the mountain. Verse 20, behold now, the city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape thither. It is not a little one, and my soul shall live. All right, now it's a little wordy in the King James. Let's read it, Genesis 19:20. Let's read it in a different translation. So written a little wordy there. Another translation states it this way, right? Genesis 19:20. Look, now let me read. So go back to verse 18. But Lot said to them, "No, my lords, please, your servant has indeed found favor with you, and you have shown me great kindness by saving my life. But I can't run in the mountains. The disaster will overtake me, and I will die. Look, this town is close enough for me to flee to. It is a small place. Please let me run to it. It is a small place, isn't it? So that I can survive." And he said to him, "All right, I'll grant your request about this matter too, and will not demolish the town you mentioned. Hurry up, run to it, for I cannot do anything until you get there. Therefore, the name of the city is Zoar." All right, so Lot is told to get out. You got to go. You got to go. And when he's like, "No, I only want to go here." But they're like, "Okay, go ahead, flee to that place. You can flee there." So what do we learn from this use of the word flee? What do we gain from this story? Do we gain that when God tells us to go somewhere, we're like, "Hey, here's my request"? Maybe you could make an argument that this is somehow about making a request to God. I don't know. I don't know if I would see that. I think what we see is that once again, fleeing is connected to great sin. Where there is great sin, there can be judgment, there can be chastisement, and it leads to fleeing. Sin will lead to fleeing from you. Sin may create a situation you feel like you have to flee from, you have to flee to, right? Either because you want to commit a sin, you flee to something other. It's just always connect. You can think of all the different ways fleeing is connected to sin if you want, instead of me trying to map them all out for you here. But in this particular case, all of this sin in Sodom and Gomorrah is leading now Lot to having to flee. He came there clearly. You have to look at it from a materialistic, fleshly, carnal reason, because this area looked the best. He's now in these cities. He's now taken position there and sitting in the gates. He maybe have position, power, maybe recognition, maybe material wealth, whatever the case may be. And guess what? Even though he got all of that, sin will ultimately lead that you will have to flee. So I still think it's connected to sin, but it's also connected to fleeing God's wrath. We have to flee to safety. Now, the safety we flee to is we flee God's wrath by fleeing to the safe place he points out. And for us, that safe place is only Jesus Christ. He is that safe place. He's the one we have to run to. All right. Christians may make fun of the concept of a safe place. Instead of making fun of a safe place and people wanting a safe place, what we should say is there's only one safe place, and that is Jesus Christ. Flee to him. Flee from the wrath to come. Flee there. Lot and his family had to flee. God's wrath is coming. We have to flee. We have to go to safety, and that is to Jesus Christ. We don't flee on the basis of our morality or the basis of our goodness. We flee on the basis of his mercy and his grace. Even Lot knows the only reason he's being able to flee is because of God's mercy, because of grace. It's only because of God's kindness are we able to flee to Christ. I think this focuses more on fleeing and that particular fleeing from wrath. Maybe that's the main focus on this one. But it's still connected to sin. Wherever there is sin, it almost always leads to some kind of fleeing, some type of running, some trying to escape. Abram and Sarai's sin and the way they mistreat someone led Hagar to flee. But in that particular case, she flees, but she's told to go back and submit. So sometimes we want to flee and we're told to go back. Sometimes we're told to go and we linger. Sometimes we're told to go and we're like, I don't want to go there. Okay. But this fleeing very much is connected to sin and God's wrath. Now, maybe we have time for one more. All right. There's Genesis 16:8. There's Genesis 19:20. The next one is Genesis 27:43. 27:43. 27:43. And guess what we find again? This fleeing is going to once again happen in the context of deception, sin, wrong. It's just a messed up situation. Once again, all of these fleeing is connected even to the great sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's the fleeing has to occur. Even when you're told to flee, Lot doesn't want to go. You've got all the great sin, everything connected to that. In Genesis 16, you've got the horrible situation with the way Sarai and Abram treats Hagar. And then here in Genesis 27, you probably know at least the basic story, right? And I'm going to read from this translation. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could not see, he called to his older son Esau and said to him, "My son." And he said, "Here I am." And he said, "Look, I am old and do not know the day of my death. So now take your hunting gear, your quiver and bow, and go out to the field to hunt some game for me. Then make me a delicious meal so that I love, and bring it to me to eat so that I can bless you before I die." Hey, I'm getting old. I'm going to die. I want this meal. Please do this for me and you will get the blessing. Remember, the blessing is a big deal in that culture in that time, right? This is a huge, significant, spiritual, I dare say, situation. But now Rebekah, all right, Rebekah was listening to what Isaac said to his son Esau. So while Esau went to the field to hunt game, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Listen, I heard your father talking with your brother Esau. He said, 'Bring me game and make a delicious meal for me to eat so that I can bless you in the Lord's presence before I die. Now, my son, listen to me and do what I tell you. Go to the flock, bring me 2 choice young goats.'" And she comes up with an entire plan to deceive Isaac. Jacob is going to dress up like he's Esau. And he's going to think, "Oh, you're Esau." And guess what? He's going to bless Jacob. He's going to steal the blessing. This whole thing is set up to steal the blessing from Esau. The whole thing is deceit and deception and lying and just it's a messed up situation. But where does the fleeing come into play? Well, we'll go back to the King James, right? I'm going to turn to Genesis 27. Now, go to verse 41. All right? Verse 41. And Esau, Genesis 27:41. And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, "The days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then will I slay my brother Jacob." Oh, now we have Esau who wants to kill his brother. Now, once again, this is a family. This is Isaac. This is Rebekah. This is Jacob. This is Esau. This is a family very much connected. Once again, this is supposedly in a sense, the family who knows God. The family God has revealed things to, has spoken to. Once again, the godly. So you see that in all of these stories, we have supposedly godly people who are involved in these horrible situations. So now we have some major family disorder going on. And he wants to kill his brother. He wants to kill his brother. And these words of Esau, her elder son, were told to Rebekah as she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said unto him, "Behold, thy brother Esau, as touching thee, doth comfort himself, purposing to kill thee. Now, therefore, my son, obey my voice and arise, flee to Laban, my brother, to Haran." You got to flee. You got to get out. You got to go. You got to go. Now, what do we do with this one? What do we do with this next use of the word flee? Well, I'm going to throw out an idea here, and I haven't worked. Now, remember, in all of these, the one I did earlier today, and the broadcast I'm doing now, I'm working these out in real time. Okay, so I want to make sure you understand. I tried to articulate that in the last episode, and when you do it in real time, you can make your mistakes. But really, this is like, hey, I'm sitting down with my Bible to try to work on this assignment I've given you. The only difference is I'm working out my assignment in real time in front of a microphone. So hopefully I like doing it that way because it's much more organic. It's not overproduced. It's more real, but then you can end up making a mistake like I did. But all right. So I haven't gotten this worked out, but this is what this fleeing here makes me think of. Jacob has to flee. So we could say something along these lines. When you steal a blessing, you have to flee. Stolen blessings lead to fleeing. Now, maybe we could add a little bit more to that. You can try to work that out. You can flesh it out. You may be able to make it better. But it's a stolen blessing. Instead of, in a sense, partaking or being able to benefit from the blessing, you have to flee. You have to run. Or you could say deception, stealing, once again, sin leads to fleeing. Now, you could argue that maybe this is more about sometimes we're told to stand and fight. Sometimes we're told to flee. But I don't think that really works in this situation. This is not a situation where he should stand and fight. You stole the blessing. You stole what did not belong to you. Now, that can lead to fleeing. Now, we've all been our lives are filled with situations where we sin, we do wrong, and we find ourselves fleeing. I've been there. We've all been there. What do you want to do with the Jacob Esau fleeing? I think I did more. I think I spent more time with the Genesis 19 one. So let's go through all the use of the word flee so far in Genesis. We have, my Blue Letter Bible app decided to reset. So let me do a search again. Here we go. The first one is Genesis 16:8. What do you want to do with that one? Next, Genesis 19:20, and the third one is Genesis 27:43. 27:43. What do you want to do with these? Jacob and Esau, to me, it's stolen blessing leads to fleeing. But I think wherever there is sin, someone's fleeing. Look, either you flee to God for salvation and for forgiveness, or you flee from, you're trying to flee from your sin, from your consequences of your sin. You're trying to flee from it, or you're trying to flee to that. You're trying to flee to something you're not supposed to have. We also can see that there's a time that we flee and God tells us to stay. We can't forget that. I do like the contrast between Hagar fleeing and being told to go back, and Lot basically being told to flee, and he's sticking around. He's lingering. So I think sometimes we can flee when we shouldn't, and sometimes we can stick around when we shouldn't. All right. Do you see any other correlation between these? Any other lesson that comes to your mind? Now remember, these historical narratives, I'm not necessarily saying they're prescribing any specific concepts here, but we see the word flee, and we can see how these concepts may teach us or say something to us about fleeing and not fleeing, and when to flee and how to flee. It may give us some concepts to at least consider. All right, I want to say more, but we're at 43 minutes. There you go. So we've looked at Genesis 16:8. We've looked at Genesis 19:20. We've looked at Genesis 27:43. Now, if you want, you can look up sermons on Genesis 16:8, Genesis 19:20, and Genesis 27:43. I don't know if they will actually focus on the fleeing part because, that wouldn't be their emphasis. Our emphasis this week is on the word flee. So you may want to just look up sermons on to flee or fleeing. But there you have it. Now, if you've worked on any of this, love to get your thoughts on all of this. All right. Now, the main one of them, a hermeneutical lesson from this is don't ever do what I did today. I violated a basic hermeneutical principle. So I was so focused on the word flee, so focused on the fact that it showed up in Genesis 16:8, that I immediately was like, okay, Hagar's fleeing. I know why Hagar's fleeing, because Sarai mistreats her. I already know this. So I took all of my knowledge, all of my knowing, which then turned into presuppositions. So then when I decided to go back and work through Genesis 16:1 and following, when I get to who's despising whom, I just immediately put the blame on Sarai in that particular passage. Now, I do believe she does despise not only her husband, she despises Hagar. I do believe that's correct to say, but I misread that verse because I was reading into it what my knowledge and presupposition had already given me, which I shouldn't have done that. I mean, I've read and I've preached the text who knows how many times. But at that moment, I was so preoccupied with the other. So the hermeneutical lesson is sometimes your knowledge of a story can lead to imposing a presupposition on a particular verse that may not be accurate. So you always got to watch yourself in doing that. It's easy for me to say that. You watched me do it in real time earlier. I think we handled Genesis 19 pretty good, and I think we did pretty good with Genesis 27:43. There we go. I'd love to get your feedback. newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. Tomorrow, we'll probably do at least maybe one or two broadcasts during the day. Now, we won't be live streaming tomorrow night from Victory Baptist Church, but I will be at the church and we will be having a Wednesday evening service. It will be recorded and then uploaded after. We will either be going back to our series on eschatology, right? Which we're, I think, up to the premillennialism, I think is what we're up to. We've looked at postmillennialism. We've looked at amillennialism. So we may do that. Or I may work on the fleeing verses, or I may just do something completely different. I don't know. We will see. But be looking for that to be uploaded sometime tomorrow night. All right. Thanks for listening. Everyone have a great evening. God bless.